Hello everybody, Ignatius L. Jackson CPA here. I wanted to do a video for you today in regards to some provisions of the CARES Act. So the CARES Act stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And so I want to talk about two key provisions from that related to some loans that you can apply for your business if you have been affected by the coronavirus activities and the economic downturn that we're in right now. So the CARES Act was signed into law on March 27th of 2020 and basically provides various benefits to small business owners and to individuals. We're not going to cover the individual rebate at this time because we're still waiting on official guidance from the IRS to clarify things a little bit more. And as soon as we get that, we'll do another video to explain the implications of that. So this is pretty much focusing on business owners right now and the small business owners provisions from the act. So in regards to loans specifically. So there's some other business provisions in the act as well that we will not cover in this video. Those will also be covered in a later video to go a little bit more in detail in the CARES Act. But these particular projects right here are very time sensitive, and so I wanted to make sure that we covered these first and foremost. So that said, there's two things within the CARES Act that I want to talk about today. It's the Keep American Workers Paid and Employed Act, which is basically also kind of referred to as the Paycheck Protection Program, which is through the Small Business Administration. And then there's also a $10,000 advance that is eligible through the Small Business Association as well that we'll talk about a little bit later. But let's talk about the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employment Act, also the Paycheck Protection Program that you're seeing advertised or posted on the Small Business Administration's website. So ultimately what this is doing is it's SBA guaranteed loans that your business can apply for, and it's up to $10 million, and the loan amount is based solely off of your, I shouldn't say solely, but the amount itself is based solely off of your payroll cost during either the previous year or for the first 2 months of 2020. And so just depending on when your business was started. So if you were in operation in 2019, then it will probably be based off of your average monthly payroll during 2019 times 2.5. So let's say, for example, you had average payroll cost of 1.2 million during 2019. That would be $100,000 per month. You take $100,000, multiply that times 2.5, so you're eligible for a loan of $250,000. So that's kind of how that calculation works. And based on, they're still doing credit checks and things of that nature. I'm not entirely sure exactly if there's a minimum threshold, what that is yet, or any of that information. But there is some sort of qualifiers that they are looking at to qualify people for these. But I definitely would think that you should go ahead and apply for these if you, in fact, have been affected by the coronavirus. So things like you got employees that aren't showing up for work, your business had to close because of an order by the state or the federal government, you just had a significant loss in revenues. Basically, people just stop showing up to your business. If you're a consultant, for example, as well, your customers aren't paying the invoices anymore, or cancel your contracts. So there's a number of factors that can kind of get you to the point where you're basically affected by the coronavirus. They haven't issued any specific guidelines on exactly what needs to be done. So there's no hard and fast thresholds or anything like that in terms of you have to, which there are for some other programs, but not for this one. So as long as you've been affected, you can basically apply for this loan. The loans are available to businesses with not more than 500 employees, including sole proprietorships, independent contractors, and nonprofits. So if you had employees and it's under 500 employees, then you're eligible. And then if you're a sole independent contractor or self-employed person, you're still eligible for this. And so this is basically available to just about any business that's in operation, including nonprofits. And so you can begin applying for the loans on April 3rd if you are a small business, and if you're a sole proprietorship, you can begin applying for the loans on April 3rd if you are a small business or a sole proprietorship. And on April 10th, if you are an independent contractor or a self-employed person. So those are the dates that you can begin to apply for things. The business must have been in operation on February 15th of 2020 in order to qualify for these. So if you started your business after that date, you're not going to be eligible for this program. And the business must have had employees for whom the business paid salaries and payroll taxes, or paid independent contractors as reported on the 1099 miscellaneous form. So you do have to have made some payments for payroll taxes and things of that nature by that date, essentially, to be eligible for this. So businesses must certify that the uncertainty of current economic conditions makes the loan necessary to support their ongoing operations. So on the form for the application, you have to certify essentially that you have been affected, and due to the uncertainty of events, you need these funds in order to be able to continue to operate and to pay your payroll costs, and some other qualifying costs that are eligible. So you also have to acknowledge that the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll, mortgage payments, lease payments, and utility payments. So those are basically the only costs that are allowed to be used for these funds. And if you use them for any other purpose, there's some pretty stiff penalties that they have put into the letters, the applications, where if they find out that you used it for purposes other than that, for example, just to pay yourself and not actually pay your workers, things of that nature, or to go buy a property or something like that, you can definitely get yourself into some trouble. So be careful, and make sure that you're following and complying with the rules. The loan amount under this program will be reduced by loans obtained under the Small Business Disaster Relief Program. If you applied for the loans that were available a little over a week ago through the SBA, and you still can apply for this one, but the amount that you're going to be eligible for is going to be reduced by any amount that you received under that program. So just keep that in mind. There are no personal guarantees on these loans, which they usually do typically require personal guarantees, and so that's another great benefit. There's no personal guarantee, and there's no collateral that you have to put up in order to get this loan. There's no payments on the loans for 6 months, so all the interest and principal payments are deferred for 6 months, and the interest rate will be 0.5%. Now, during that time period from loan origination through the end of the deferment period, interest does continue to accrue. So if you get to the point where you're at the end of that term and you aren't eligible for forgiveness, you will still be paying interest. Now, mind you, that interest rate is extremely low. I was really surprised when they came out with that. That's really cheap in terms of an interest rate, so it's very beneficial. So worst case, if you don't qualify for the forgiveness, or you haven't quite met the requirements for the forgiveness, worst case, you do have to pay it back, and they're giving you basically 2 years to pay it back, and so that's 2 years from the date of the loan origination, is my understanding as of right now. The amount of the loan will be eligible for 100% forgiveness, as you've heard, if you meet the criteria for forgiveness, which includes using the loan proceeds for only those items that we discussed earlier, which are payroll related costs, mortgage interest payments, rent, utilities, and interest on other obligations that were incurred before February 15, 2020. Not entirely sure what those other obligations are yet. I imagine it's probably got something, maybe like credit card payments or other loan payments related to maybe vehicles and things like that you might have, like a fleet or something. So there's definitely some ambiguity there, and I'm sure some additional information will come out over time, but as of right now, that's basically what's worded in the law. Payroll costs includes, so to define payroll costs for you, here's what's included in that: group health benefits, employee wages and salaries, vacation pay, sick leave pay, parental pay, family leave pay, retirement benefits, state and local taxes. So for example, withholding on state and local taxes, and also state unemployment taxes, the amount you have to pay for those, on the compensation of your employees. Payroll costs do not, let me say that one more time, payroll costs do not include the federal payroll tax amounts that you are responsible for Social Security and Medicare, or the withholdings related to Social Security or Medicare. Okay, so payroll costs do not include those. So when you're going through and figuring out what payroll costs are eligible, you have to make sure you're doing the calculation appropriately, which we can definitely help you through that if you need some assistance figuring that out. For self-employed people and sole proprietors, the net earnings from self-employment over 1 year period will be utilized. Okay, so that's how they determine what that is. Basically, if you look at your bottom of your Schedule C, and you look at, or if you look at the Schedule SE on your tax return, whatever amounts on there that you're getting charged self-employment taxes for is probably the amount that will be eligible. And then you would take that and multiply that by 2.5, and that's what you're going to be eligible to receive. Again, sole proprietors and self-employed people are still eligible to apply for the forgiveness. The maximum amount of salaries for an individual person is $100,000. So if your net self-employment is greater than $100,000, that's the most that you can qualify for in terms of using that. If you have multiple employees and most of them are under $100,000, but there's a few that are over $100,000, you have to reduce the few that are over $100,000 to that $100,000 amount when you're determining the payroll costs. In order for the funds to be forgiven, they must be used at least 75% for payroll costs. So they came out with this, and the guidance that came out yesterday, 75% of the funds have to be used for payroll costs. Otherwise, it's not going to be forgiven 100%. So you have to keep that in mind as you're going through and doing that. It's very important. It's going to be very important to actually track how you're spending this information very well. Maybe even set up a separate bank account or something like that to make your life easier. But yeah, you got to be very careful on how you're tracking all these costs. You have until June 30th of 2019 to apply for the loan, but there is a cap on how many funds are available. And so I would suggest, if you think you're going to need this funding, apply as soon as possible, because it's essentially going to be on a first come first served basis. And so the Treasury Secretary has came out and said we recommend that you guys apply early, because once they reach that threshold, they're not currently authorized to go above it. So Congress would have to act further in order for them to extend any further loans beyond that threshold. So definitely apply early if you think you qualify. Eligible wages to be forgiven do not include wages that are eligible for payroll tax credit for the sick leave or family leave wages. So for example, if you have an employee that you've been paying under those provisions, which we talked about in our last video, for the mandatory sick leave or family leave requirements, that amount that you're using for the payroll tax credit is not eligible for the loan. So you have to reduce it by whatever those wages are. Okay, so amount of forgiveness is based on payments for the allowed amounts made during a 8-week period that begins on the date of the origination for the loan. So you basically have 8 weeks to expend the money after you receive it, and then you would apply for the forgiveness after that 8-week time period, is my understanding of how this is going to work. And so if you don't utilize all the funds during that 8-week period, you may end up at this time having to pay back what you didn't use. So the amount allowed to be forgiven may be reduced if you have a reduction in the number of employees, or a reduction in the salaries or wages of your employees. So there's some various metrics and calculations that go into that. And so I would say just plan on trying to keep the staffing at the same level. If you already cut people, you have until basically June 30th of 2020 to hire them back to meet the thresholds. Okay, so the way that works is if you made any changes, like if you terminated people or furloughed people during the time period of February 15th, 2020 and April 26th, 2020, as long as you hire them back or adjust their wages back by June 30th, you should be eligible for the 100% forgiveness still. So it's important to understand what was your full-time equivalents last year and how much were they being paid last year, and you have to basically keep them at that same amount and keep the same number of employees. So any amount that will be forgiven will be reduced if you haven't met those requirements. In order to obtain the forgiveness, you will have to provide documentation proving that you qualify for such for the forgiveness. Things that are going to be requested are going to be payroll records, canceled checks, receipts, information verifying payments on rent, mortgage, and debt obligations. So whatever you're using it for, you're going to have to keep really good records, like I mentioned. So it's good to come up with some sort of system to track this, and we can definitely help you figure out how best to do that. But you want to be able to, at the end of this time period, go to the lender and say, okay, here's all my documentation. I want to go ahead and apply for the forgiveness. And then they basically have 60 days to make a decision and essentially submit that to the SBA so that they can get the funding back to basically forgive the loan. Okay, so again, very important to keep good documentation and to track everything. Any amount that is forgiven under this program will not be includable in income of the business, meaning it is essentially 100% tax-free. And so it's a great benefit to your business. If you utilize it for the proper purposes, you'll get some huge tax benefits that will, not only just tax benefits, but it will help you to survive and to continue to operate. For amounts not eligible to be forgiven, loans have a loan term of 2 years from the origination date. I kind of mentioned that before. And again, your interest rate will be 0.5%, 0.5%, very low. So even if you can't quite meet all the requirements to get it 100% forgiven, it's still a really lucrative and beneficial program to get you through this tough time. But the intention has to be at the onset to use it for those purposes, and to kind of meet the thresholds. So as long as you meet all the thresholds, you'll be fine. If you get a loan under the Paycheck Protection Program, you cannot do the retention credit or the deferral of payroll taxes, which are two other things that are allowed for businesses under the CARES Act. So you're ineligible for those two programs if you do this program for the Paycheck Protection Program. So keep that in mind. As I mentioned in my previous video, they're trying to prevent people from double dipping. They don't want you to have a benefit over here and then have a benefit over here, and all of a sudden you got more of a tax benefit or savings than you really were hurt by this process. So they're giving you multiple options to basically get you through this, and it's up to you to decide which options to utilize. So they're definitely trying to give you options and ability to do some things, but they don't want you to double dip and get too much of a benefit, right? Which makes sense. Small business, so that's really the Paycheck Protection Program at a very high level. Those are the terms and conditions related to it. We can definitely help you through that process. If you're looking to do that, we can help you figure out how much you would qualify for, help you fill out the applications, and kind of act as your agent in regards to that. So definitely let us know if you want some assistance in making sure that you get that done right, get all the documentation done correctly and everything like that, and we can definitely help you through that. So reach out to us if you have any questions or need some assistance. The other program that I want to talk about is the Small Business Disaster Relief Loans Advance, which we talked about in the video that we did the other day, but just wanted to also further clarify some things in relation to that. You are still eligible to get that grant and do the Paycheck Protection Program. So they came out and said you can do both, but it's two separate applications essentially. So you would have to go through and do the advance I think you actually have to do this before you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. So if you wanted to do the $10,000 advance, you want to go ahead and apply for that probably today or as soon as possible before you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. It's not exactly clear how that process will work. The one thing I do know is the amount that you receive under the advance will reduce the amount that you're eligible to receive under the Paycheck Protection Program. So if you are receiving funds under the Paycheck Protection Program, under the advance, you do have to reduce that by the Paycheck Protection Program. So that's why once you get into the Paycheck Protection Program, you are ineligible to apply for the other loans and the other advances, is my understanding right now. So that's why it's a process in terms of how you want to do it. If you need some funding immediately, I would go ahead and apply for the advance, is kind of my recommendation right now. You can get up to $10,000 based on however they're determining how much you qualify for. And then you get that grant. That's supposed to be paid within 3 days of applying for it. And then you should be eligible to then apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. And they just reduce it by the amount that you received from that. So chances are to get the funding from the Paycheck Protection Program, it's probably going to take a week or two, maybe even a little bit more. I'm not sure. They haven't really clarified the timeline of when the payments for the loans will come out and be in your account. So continue to, if you think you need money right away, I would definitely recommend going ahead and applying for the advance. As I mentioned yesterday, the advance does not have to be repaid, even if you are denied the disaster relief loan. Again, it's just a good benefit to get you some funding right away to help out with things. The advance is expected to be used for the same kind of things that you're using the Paycheck Protection Program for. So payroll costs, to pay the sick leave, retain your employees, to do rent, mortgage payments, etc. But there's no requirements to provide any documentation or anything in relation to what it was used for. It's kind of an honor system sort of a thing, essentially. I'm sure if they do find, get some sort of a complaint or something that you were using it for ineligible sources, they may try to come after you. But as of right now, there's not really documentation required for that $10,000 grant. I do want to clarify, though, it is up to $10,000. It's not automatic that you'll get the full $10,000. They do some sort of formula, which they haven't really publicized exactly what that is and how that works. But there's some sort of formula to determine how much you will get as the advance. So based on your application. And the application is very easy to go through. I think it's taking people maybe 10 to 15 minutes to go through the application and just ask you some basic information about your business and about the owners of the business, and ask you to certify that you're not, don't have a felony, or you're not a criminal, things of that nature. You're not behind on some various things, and you're not disbarred from getting federal funding, that kind of thing. So as long as you meet those criteria, it should be pretty easy to apply, and you should be able to get the funding. So overall, this is a pretty high-level summary of some things related to the Paycheck Protection Program, and obviously the advance grant that you're hearing a lot about that were in the CARES Act. Like I said, we'll go through and do additional items in the future in relation to other items that are covered in the CARES Act, including the employee retention program and some other programs that are in there, the deferral, the payroll taxes, things like that. We're still waiting on a little bit more guidance on those programs before I want to issue this video on that. But these loan programs are eligible to start for the Paycheck Protection Program April 3rd, which is Friday. So I wanted to make sure I got this information out to you so you can prepare to go through and do that. And then the advance payment, the advance payment, if you wanted to go through and do that as well, you can do that. So If there's any other questions or any other concerns that you have or anything like that you need help with, feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, we can definitely help you out with the application for the Paycheck Protection Program, and if to kind of figure out the documents you need, and to work with your bank to go through and do that, and your lender. So definitely let us know if you need any help. Otherwise, we'll talk to you later. Hope everybody has a good day.